So I just boiled it down to Abraham Golden in my novel.
I thought he was a standout. I think that was smart, and I think the story was as much about the plot as it was about him. And I think
Right.
that's what made it really shine.
Yeah, I think, and too, I wanted to make him an African American because A, he was African American in real life, but B, I think that fiction only succeeds if writers are willing to take risks. So
Absolutely.
I wrote it with an idea that the full knowledge that I'm a 50-year-old white guy. I'm 50 in February. I do not have the African American experience, but I could certainly be an ally. I could certainly be someone who has listened and someone who says, "Here's what I heard. Did I get it right? Please correct me." And
Yeah.
I think if you come at it with a sense of humility, that people accept that. People have said, don't write black characters because it's touchy. I've never been afraid of that because I know it's going to make me a better writer in the long run. And I did show it to some African American friends of mine who are also writers, and a couple of them said, "You know what? Push the envelope a little bit harder." I said, "That I'm not going to do." But they definitely enjoyed. They said it wasn't making him a superhero or a 2023 version of what an African American lawman would go through, but it fit the time
Yeah.
period.
No, I agree with you. And I've grappled with the same question in my mind. I get it to a much lesser extent. My protagonist in my book is male, which is not
Mm-hmm.
quite the same thing, but I do get that a little bit. And I think to me the beauty of writing is being able to step into someone's shoes who's not like you, and
Right.
and I think that's that it kind of breeds a certain empathy and understanding that I mean that should be what we're all going for. And
Yes.
and I think it's a narrow world we live in if you're only writing about yourself and what you know. And I think that's kind of a dead end. And also at a certain point, that's just called nonfiction,
Yes. Exactly right.
So
Exactly right. And also, I think the audience deserves to see your attempt at trying to make a convincing character, as long as you're respectful and it's accurate. And I think that as long as you don't pander to people, you're going to have a much better story. I think that's why you're seeing a lot of the movies that are coming out from the comic books franchises are starting to bomb because people are burned out with the hero motif and the superpower motif. But then I think also you're starting to see people say you're trying too hard. You just can't pluck somebody out and make them this when they've always been a certain way. Why don't you create a new character?
yeah,
There's nothing wrong with that in my book.
yeah,
Create a newer, better character.
yeah,
So that's always been my opinion. That's what I strove for in Chicago '63.
yeah. Um, so another thing I was struck by was how all these undercurrents in America at the time of unrest and dissatisfaction with the government. And I saw some parallels to today and
Right.
divisions today. And do you feel like what can we learn from what was going on back then? I mean, these movements that were so um, that that were so I don't know what the word is, impassioned, or they felt so strong and they were willing to kill the president. I mean, that's nuts, right? So I mean,
It is.
yeah, so what lessons or parallels did you draw from then to today?
Sure. I think there was a high level of zealotry back then, and you're starting to see that right now. And I've never trust zealots, especially in a political movement, because once their particular gripe is either settled or satiated or destroyed, you lose them. They're gone. They don't care. The hell with carrying petitions. The hell with voting. I'm gone. But if you feed it and they get victory after victory, then they become more fanatical, and that's a danger too. So it's always, and you had a lot of that starting back then. You had a huge fear of communism, and we laugh at it now. What they did when I first started writing, I should correct that. They did start laughing about the Great Russian Threat when I started writing my earlier thrillers in the 2000s. And they said, "Oh, the Russians are as the bad guys, the Chinese as the bad guys." Give me a break. Tom
I
Clancy called.
remember. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, Tom Clancy called. He wants his plot back. Well, guess what? Now we're in 2023, and who are we all complaining about? The Russians
Oh, I
invaded.
know. I know. I joined the agency in 2002, and I know it was like no one wanted to go work on Russia because it was like, who cares, right? But yeah,
Right.
go on. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. So back then they were concerned about the expanse of communism, and I don't care what your political leanings are. If you look at a map and you look at a timeline, you see that it was advancing, and they
Yeah.
saw America. There was also the you had to remember with the Kennedys, his Joe Kennedy, Jack Kennedy's father, was the ambassador to England when they appeased Hitler, and so there were a lot of people who thought that the Kennedys were inherently weak. There was a blood flaw with them, that they didn't want to stand up to dictators, and they could see the Cold War was coming, because up until then you had Korea, and then that started, and then Vietnam started. So it was a shooting war, but they thought it was going to cool down, and that's why they were saying we're going to be fighting these people for 50 years if we don't take care of it now. And so I think that's a lot of what was going on back then. And you also had civil rights going on, which was long overdue. You had people in the South who were angry about that. They started getting mobilized. The mob was getting squeezed, and
Yeah.
they started acting up. And so that's what this cauldron was of things that came to a boil. And I think that's what I tried to portray in the book, that it wasn't just one guy with a gripe and a gun. It was a little bit more than that going on in the country. And once you have that perspective, it definitely puts everything into focus.
Mhm. So you said you have a trilogy planned?
Planned, yes. I've gotten some good feedback on it. I'm waiting to hear final stuff now, but this all rose out of me complaining to poor James Abbott about me trying to find a home for my trilogy, which is currently called Dallas 63. That title might
Uh-huh.
change, but like I said earlier, it's told about a Dallas special investigations detective, fictional, named Dan Wilson, and he winds up turning Oswald into an informant for him. He's also Wilson's also adjacent to the FBI, and the stuff he finds out from Oswald's activities ultimately lead to uncovering the Chicago plot, which everyone thought, okay, in my book, and even in real life, they figured, all right, fine, these guys screwed up, we got them, no problem. Then they uncovered the plot in Miami, and then that didn't happen. They canceled the trip because of it. And they figured, Dallas, this is the game that can't shoot straight. Don't worry about it. But there were other people who were worried about it. And so my trilogy is going to cover the months leading up to the assassination, will be book one, and then the assassination itself. Book two will be Dan Wilson trying to get his source, Lee Harvey Oswald, clear of these charges. And then the third book would be we'll be chasing the people who are actually the shooters, one of whom fled to Canada in real life, Jack Crawford.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's what I want to do, and I want to tell them in a trilogy setting, because it's too much to cram into one book, and people aren't going to read a big thick book these days, so it has to be broken up.
Well, that sounds super interesting. I would read that in a heartbeat.
Cool, thank you.
So, and I know you're really prolific. Like, you've written a ton of books.
Yeah, I have. A lot of them are in my name. A lot of them aren't. I can't talk about which ones are not in my name, but I'll tell you, it's a mixed blessing, because they've all popped up on bestseller lists throughout the years, and I can't claim them, but it still is a kick that I wrote something and somebody bought it, and they've all been highly reviewed. So I'm very happy about that.
So I have a question about that, if I
Sure.
about ghostwriting, which
Right.
is do you get to use your own voice, or are you trying to mimic someone else's voice, or is it some combination of the two?
It depends on what the project is. Like with this one, they told I'm trying not to say because it's a recorded line, but there were certain things I couldn't do. Couldn't have too many curses. Couldn't have too much gore. Could have violence, but it had to be, and not too much graphic sex either, or any sex at all. So with that in mind, in that respect, it did limit my voice. But I don't write a lot of sex. I don't write a lot of gore. I do write a lot of action, which is good. It helps things move in the book. So with that, there are some, however, where you ghostwrite for. I can tell you the one that I did, because my name's on the cover, was Ralph Compton's stories. And so they would, in that instance, they gave me an outline of what I needed to write, what they want, the kind of book they wanted. A gunslinger takes place on a stagecoach, or it takes place on a cattle drive. And so they said, again, not too much violence, not too much sex, and it can't be told in the first person. So different series have different, let's say, Bibles, if you will, that you have to follow. But for the most part, I enjoy writing them because they allow me to tell my story in my way, with a few exceptions, and that's fine.
But do you feel like you have to kind of alter the voice for different authors?
Yeah, I mean, it can't. It depends on the series. Like, I think if you were going to write a Robert Parker book, and if you're going to write an Agatha Christie book, obviously it can't be the same kind of book. The voice is different. But with some of them, if they're just keeping the name going, yeah, they might not mind you writing in your own voice. You know, for me, I always try to keep it separate, because if I do that, then all my work will not sound the same, and I don't want that to happen. You know, and it makes me a more disciplined writer when I do change up the voice and I do change up the way the story unfolds. So for me, I find it rewarding, financially, and also artistically. It keeps me sharp. So yeah, I mean, ideally, I'd love to write in each genre that I write in, one book per year. But lately, it's been a lot of one genre, and I've been having a lot of fun with it. So
good. What are your tips, because you're so prolific, for, I mean, I've written one book and I felt exhausted, and I'm really struggling with my second book. Like, I'm like a page or a couple pages in, and what are your how do you become so prolific? How are you able to just keep writing over and over?
it's a mixed blessing, because my mind never shuts off. I don't sleep a lot, so I have to take the sleep medication in order to get a good night's sleep. And if I don't sleep, then I'm not very creative, and everything starts getting jumbled. So for me, my mind's always working, and it's always turning things over, even though I'm not consciously thinking about it. So when I sit down, I have the blessing of typing fast. And that's a mixed blessing, because I'll get into a story and not realize that all these hours have passed, and I haven't eaten, and I haven't stood up for 4 hours. And I'm like the Hunchback of Notre Dame, walking around with my hands like a tyrannosaur. But that's what happens. And I type really fast. So sometimes I'll do 5,000 words in a day. And it's just
5,000 words.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I can do that. Usually I'll max out usually around 2,500, 3,000 a day. But yeah, I mean, I have done, when I was on a good clip, I would clip off 5,000 a day. One day I got, it was my first book, Prohibition. I sat and I did 10,000 words in a day. And it took me an hour to uncurl myself. And I was much younger back then. I mean, really
a ninth of a book. That's crazy. Like, you could write in 9 days at that rate.
Yeah, pretty much. And I used to do that back in the pulp days. But if you read some of those books, some of them are awesome, but a lot of them, you can tell that a guy in a hotel room banged this out over 2 days with cigarettes and whiskey. That's just how it worked back then. It doesn't work like that anymore.
Yeah, I happen to love Pulp Fiction, so
me too. There's a lot of it that's great, and some of it isn't. But I mean, the writing in there is professional. And I always say, if you want to learn how to write, read some of those books, because that's how you see the craft done.
And there's a certain kind of unvarnished quality to them that I love.
Oh yeah, no, there definitely is, and it's a great way if someone's writing a historical piece. It's a great way to learn about how everything was going back then and what was happening. Google will only tell you so much. If you don't have the right book, you might not get the right primary resource. But if you read the fiction, it'll tell you what's happening.
Yeah.